We are here today to talk about what is on the ballot. This is our third and final event where we've been breaking down everything that is on the local, or the most key items, I should say, on the local ballot in San Francisco, starting with the mayor's race, some ballot measures. And today we're going to be talking about a slew of ballot measures on the ballot that are intended to fix City Hall, fix the dysfunction and all that's wrong. Everything from commissions to how to recruit more employees and beyond. So we will be answering your questions. Please drop any questions you have in the Q&A box and we'll get to as many as we can over the next hour. So welcome, guys. This is our politics pod. Gabriel Greschler, Han Lee, and Joe Fitzgerald Rodriguez. This is the entire politics pod, and it's so exciting to be together to talk about this.
We don't spend nearly enough time together.
I know.
Never see you guys.
I love this is a great little reunion.
I know. We sit all of 2 feet away from each other in the office, so we're in touch all day. So let's start with there are 2, not 1 but 2 ballot measures on the ballot related to commissions, and I can imagine that there are probably a lot of people out there thinking they're getting their ballot and they're like, why should I care about commissions? Why is this such a hot topic right now? They look kind of superficially similar, like they're both intended to reform the commission system. But let's just start with that. Why is this a topic right now?
Yeah. So yes, there are 2 ballot measures. One is Proposition D and E, and they're competing against each other, which means if both pass, the one with a higher voter support will prevail. So what are they, right? As you said, city commissions. So Prop D, which is introduced by Together SF Action. So it thinks that the city has a lot of bureaucracy, and then a big solution is to cut a lot of those commissions because those oversight bodies, just too many layers and dragging the city slow, and there's no moving forward of a lot of things, right? So they want to cut the city's commissions to like a hard cap, which is 65. They would keep some important ones like police, fire, MTA, but they would cut all those smaller, non-important one. And Prop E, which is introduced by Supervisor Paskin, who probably has some personal conflicts with Together SF and also Michael Moritz, after the New York Times story, right?
The Standards chairman is a supporter of standard disclosure, supports Together SF and Prop D.
Yeah, so Prop E is also aiming to tackle this commission bureaucracy layer, different challenges, right? But Prop E has no mandate of cutting all the commissions. It also just setting up a task force and talk about it, getting feedback, and then start from there.
Yeah, so I mean, we've written about this in the Standard before, how there are so many commissions, advisory boards, councils, all of these different groups that are a part of City Hall. And in fact, we wrote a story, I think this was last year, about how there were so many of these groups that there was almost nobody in City Hall who actually knew the total number of these groups. And I think the proponents of Prop D have pointed out that compared to other cities, we have a lot of these commissions and advisory boards. But what is the argument for why we need to just kind of drastically cut them? I mean, what is the problem with these groups?
I think yes, a key conflict here is, do you think the city's bureaucracy is the key problem that making the cities just not moving forward, right? Or do you think as public citizens like you and me, we should have more participation into local government? We can sit on the board, basically provide oversight. I feel like that's the biggest conflict here, which side you're more weighing into. I think there's a consensus of San Francisco just has way too many commissions, that's for sure. People wants to cut it, but the Together SF one, people would think that's too arbitrary, but people might think if you don't set a hard cap, San Francisco will just keep adding more commissions, right? But Paskin might think, we should still, make it slow, have a process about it.
Yeah, one kind of little additional detail that I found during some reporting on this was that Proposition D, and little backstory to it, was that I believe Together SF submitted it originally to the mayor's office. They found it to, I think, have some big issues. So then Together SF pulled it, resubmitted it. And from my understanding, talking to some folks at City Hall, it's still not fully understood by some people at City Hall. And actually the city attorney's office has been working to what I'm hearing is like a mini little Bible to understand what sort of impacts this might have on the city. So like, for example, one of the things in Prop D is that it would change I believe like the makeup of who is appointed by the mayor and then who is appointed by the board of supervisors, but like no one knows who is going to be chosen by who, and like existing commissioners, are they going to get kicked off? There's just like a lot of questions around that. So I think like there's still a lot of remaining questions about what sort of impact this is going to have.
Well, and how did we get to 65 commissions anyway? Where does that number come from?
That's a really good question. So yes, Kanishka told me the 65 is a sort of like a little arbitrary number. Right. But because of San Francisco has like 52 city departments, and she said, why do we need more than, 65? And there might be some additional oversight body, but 65 should be like a hard cap. That's what she said. Yeah.
And what are some examples of ones they want to cut away? Like, isn't there like the Animal Welfare Commission that they want to cut away? I'm forgetting some of the other ones.
It is kind of funny. It's a funny story. I once wrote a column about people looking to fill vacancies, and one reader wrote back to me and was like, "I joined the Animal Welfare Commission, and it's the sweetest. I've never been in government before. It's so cool." And he's just like some guy, he's just like some guy who lives in the city who, had worked a regular 9 to 5, and he's like, I guess I'm on the Animal Welfare Commission now.
Yeah, I know there's I think there's some homelessness ones that they want to consolidate as well.
Yeah. So, and also I think Prop D, we all know it's cutting commissions, right? But there's a key part of it. It's about actually giving more power to the mayor. So the mayor can appoint someone that without the board's approval, and the mayor can also fire directly to department heads. So, that's something, it's a big controversial topic right now, how powerful the mayor can be.
Yeah, we saw that come up with the resignation, the pre-signed resignation slips, where the mayor was stacking them in order to be able to kind of shadow fire commissioners she disagreed with.
So if
a practice she ended.
Yeah, so if Prop D passes, the mayor will have direct power to remove those commissioners that, they don't like.
Yeah. So the civil grand jury of the city actually published this big report a few months ago that we wrote about, where they were looking at the commission system. And for context, there are high profile ones like the police commission, the planning commission, I think a lot of people have heard of, and they make policy and things like that. But this group recommended a few for abolishment, and like some of these people probably have never heard of. Advisory Committee of Street Artists and Craftsmen Examiners.
I'm a part of that. You didn't know that?
Congratulations. So anyway, the point is, there are a lot of these groups. I think one thing that was highlighted in this report too, that was like some of them cancel their meetings all the time, or they have a lot of vacancies. And so, I think that is part of why that people are wanting to take a fresh look at this system right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then also I think, isn't there kind of also a question, we were talking about bureaucracy, getting rid of the commissions, also handing more power to the mayor so like things can like just get done, right? There's always been this debate of like how powerful is the mayor in San Francisco, and like, is it truly the board of supervisors who has the power, or the mayor? And I think like one of the arguments that these people who are pushing for this Proposition D would say, like, the mayor needs more power to like, tackle like the biggest issues in the city.
I think that's happening in San Francisco for a while, that the mayor blamed the board say, actually the mayor is so powerful, right? So it's like an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, but what always struck me about that argument is like, if the mayor has the power to fire commissioners she disagrees with, then what is the point of the commission at all? Why not just do the things you want to do and just bypass that? If the mayor can fire any commissioner who goes against what she says, then why doesn't she just say a thing to do and then everyone does it? Like, it to me, it always seemed like a conflict to have that. But interesting.
Yeah. So what are the most important differences between D and E that people need to know about?
So D basically sets a hard mandate of cutting. Okay, if D passes, the city has to, come up with a plan cutting all this commission. E has no mandate. E just, we're going to have like a group and then talk about this and have a recommendation in like 24 months. Yeah, that's the big difference. And also about the mayor's power.
And then, so if D passes, it's not that there are a bunch of commissions that automatically go away. They also establish some kind of task force to.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's set a hard cap, which is 65, and then for all those slots, you just put things in and fill in the duty. Yeah.
Yeah, and give us a sense of who are on both sides of this debate. Aaron Peskin introduced Prop E, Together SF Prop D. Who's supporting who here?
So yes, I think it's just basically the city's partisan line, right? The moderate side are more on D, and the progressive side are on E. But Mayor Bree, who's a moderate, who's also against D because they think Together SF, which is the Prop D ballot measure committee, is supporting, have deep ties with another mayoral candidate, Mark Farrell, right? So it's pretty complicated out there. And also for the money side, Prop D fundraised a crazy amount of money. Basically, the Prop D campaign committee is more like 6 million, and then Mark Farrell has a campaign committee to support D. That's also like 2.5 million. So there's a lot of money. But for the Prop E side, they have way less money. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, have we seen any indication that either of these are likely to pass, or is this going to be a situation when voters look at this and they're like, I don't know, no?
Exactly, right? So I think a couple years ago we have that D and E about a housing one, so both failed. Because, voters might feel confused, right? And that's exactly the playbook this time. People might feel confused, and then E is putting on the ballot just to be a poison pill, right? That's pretty clear. Peskin did that just trying to kill D, right?
All right. Let's talk about Prop C. Prop C. This was also put on the ballot by Aaron Peskin. And what this would do, this is intended to fight corruption. Right. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so essentially, Prop C would establish an inspector general, and this would be not its own office, not a new office, but housed in the city controller's office. The controller estimated the cost would be about $770,000 a year. And the idea is we've had all these scandals, right? We've had Public Works Director Mohammed Nuru, who was taking bribes. He got like a tractor and a Rolex watch in order to give away contracts and insider information. Harlan Kelly, who was at San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, who also was found guilty of taking bribes. And the idea being, let's have someone who is tasked with investigating this, who has the power of subpoena, who can execute search warrants, and who can follow up on whistleblower complaints and be proactive about finding out this kind of corruption instead of reactive, which the city has mostly been thus far.
So this would be an appointed person?
Yeah,
Who would appoint this person?
The city controller would appoint the person, and it would have to be confirmed by the mayor and the board of supervisors. So there is some element of independence in this, right? I mean, there's no perfect system and lots of different ways of doing this, but the way it would be was the budget is enshrined in the controller's office, so it can't be messed with by politicians who are maybe trying to seek retaliation.
Yeah. So we know that Aaron Peskin is in favor of this. What are the arguments? What are the arguments for this? Like, what would this do that the controller's office? Because the controller's office already can investigate, allegations of corruption, misspending, things like that. So what would this position give us above and beyond that?
Sure, and there's more duplicate. I mean, maybe I could start with the against, because there's even more duplication than just that, because the city attorney's office also investigates these issues. The San Francisco district attorney's office also investigates these issues. There's lots of groups who are tasked with executing searches against public fraud, waste, and abuse. But the argument that Peskin and other folks would make is, look, we just saw the FBI find all these corrupt folks in San Francisco city government. We saw multiple department heads put in jail for taking bribes, and none of those entities that we just listed found it first. It was the FBI who found it first. So the argument is that those entities all have other main tasks. Even the controller's office, a city controller is doing financial things for the city all the time. It's not their central task to investigate this. So the argument being that this is someone whose central role is focused on this.
And what are the arguments against this? Who is against it?
Oh yeah, well Grow SF argues that it's duplicative. Folks out there are arguing that this is a vehicle for Peskin to talk about his own mayoral candidacy and his own mayoral campaign. But one thing you could say maybe pokes a little hole in that is the fact that there's not a lot of money backing it. There's really, I think it's $26,000 in the bank for Prop C. It's not even enough to warrant putting it on the data dashboard for the Ethics Commission where it lists the financial backers for propositions. So is it a vehicle for Peskin? I don't know. It doesn't seem to be a very well-funded one if that's the case. The main argument being that it is duplicative.
I think he's also trying to, kind of like Daniel Lurie, I think he's kind of tried to cast himself in the mayor's race as like, I'm this anti-corruption force.
Right.
Yeah, accountability person. He, during this whole Dreamkeeper initiative scandal that we've been covering, has been a key voice in trying to expose a lot of these allegations. Right as we speak, there's actually a hearing going on at City Hall about this. And he's also taken a lot of swipes at Mayor Lennon Breed's connection to this initiative. He's taken a lot of swipes at Mark Farrell. And so I think there's I think maybe he's like Daniel Lurie, he's guessing that there's frustration among city residents about just corruption story after corruption story, and that he can be the face of I'm fighting this. Yeah,
instead of a vehicle for which to dump unlimited amounts of money like we've seen with, say, other propositions for certain mayoral candidates, it's really just a way to, like you're saying, make an argument about an ethos. Yeah, I think that's right.
I remember a couple years ago at the Board of Supervisors, there is a charter amendment proposal to put on the ballot that, we create a new elected office of Inspector General, which will make it a elected office, an attorney, and that person will be more independent to investigate all this corruption, right? So my question is, if it's within City Hall, appointed by, that person's boss, then how can that person be independent investigating his boss's corruption, right?
Yeah, it's tricky, right? Because there's all sorts of different ways that this could have been sliced, and any way you do it, there's someone has some influence over whoever this person is.
Yeah.
In the case of electing them, well, then you have to get endorsements and get backing from public officials, and those are the same people you're investigating, and they're going to start saying you did a bad job. And who's going to not be elected next? It's that Inspector General, right? So there's no perfect system, but the nice thing about the Comptroller's office, if you're making the Peskin argument, is that its budget is a set aside and it's enshrined. So the mayor can't muck with the budget, the Board of Supervisors can't muck with its budget. Its budget is there and protected. So that would be one argument of the independence.
And I think also, just kind of to tie this up, I know that Peskin has also pointed to cities like Atlanta who have brought this kind of model to the city. And from a very quick gander at what this program did, I think they were able to root out some serious corruption in the city.
You want a story of some serious corruption rooted out in part by one of these agencies, New York, Eric Adams. Their Inspector General office has a different name, but similar function, worked hand in hand with the FBI, and that's how they got Eric Adams with all
the
this stuff.
Public Interest Office or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting about that model is they actually have one of their inspectors embedded in each of the city departments, giving them unfettered access, which is kind of amazing.
Wow.
And then if Eric Adams leaves, doesn't the public interest, I think the public interest guy is actually appointed as mayor.
Right.
But anyway, we're going outside of San Francisco. That wouldn't happen here.
Never.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this would be one individual appointed by the Comptroller's office.
Right.
Confirmed by the mayor and the board.
The Comptroller could allot staff.
And they would have staff.
Yeah.
Okay. So what do we think this is going to pass? I mean...
Yeah, when you see measures ethics measures like this that don't have a lot of money, there was a ethics measure on the March ballot earlier this year, they usually pass pretty easily. I guess the real test of it is how much are people campaigning against it? How much does the mayoral race with all the different candidates talking about it, how much will that poke a hole in it? But with that aside, usually ethics measures do pretty well.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Okay, so let us talk about there is a measure that actually created a bunch of drama at the Board of Supervisors about firefighter retirement ages.
Yes.
I know personally in my neighborhood, I've seen a lot of canvassers for this. There are firefighters out every weekend, in my neighborhood, telling me to vote on this. But there was some interesting backstory behind this here.
Yeah.
Tell us about how this got on the ballot.
Yeah, there's a lot of very interesting political stuff going on behind the scenes with this one. So basically what is it? It would essentially lower the retirement age from 58 to 55. So if you're a firefighter, you could retire a little bit earlier and receive, I believe it's the maximum benefits at that point, as opposed to 58 years old. What's the argument for this? Basically, the firefighters are saying that their cancer risk, will be decreased if they retire a lot earlier. And I think there's the literature, is pretty clear that firefighters clearly have a, increased risk to cancer because of, smoke inhalation, other factors. And so I think another interesting part of this too is that and for our listeners to realize is the firefighters are a really important political force in the city. Back when they endorsed Mayor London Breed in 2018, they brought in, I think $1 million to supercharge her campaign. And it's really hard to say no when a firefighter shows up to your door and says, hey, you should vote for this person. They really had an on the ground kind of campaign going on. Specifically with Proposition H, the ballot measure was brought on by Supervisor Stephanie and has support, I believe, from every single supervisor, including the mayoral candidates Peskin, Lurie, and Farrell. But there's one person that's missing from all this in support, and that's Mayor London Breed. And it was really interesting. I was at the firefighters debate a couple months ago, and one of the members asked each candidate, do you support this or do you not? And Breed at that point hadn't made her decision, and you could tell it was really tense in the air when she was kind of saying, I'm still trying to figure out my position on this, blah, blah, blah. So I think it really brings up a larger issue of how much money do we want to spend when it comes to the city's budget. Right now, we're facing, a budget deficit. There's questions about the economic vitality of the city right now. So Breed eventually came out and said, no, I'm not going to support this. We're at a time when we're facing budget constraints. She is, just by way of background, supporting Proposition F, which would help police officers, but she has chosen not to support the firefighter proposition. Mm-hmm. In terms of how much money this would cost, it would have a pretty significant impact on the city. Starting next year, it would be about $3.7 million, but by 2041, that would grow to $20 million a year in pension payments out to these firefighters. There's also another interesting aspect to all this, and that's that at one of the events that the firefighters threw in support of this, Christine Pelosi showed up in support of, I believe it was either the firefighters union, or I think it was specifically for this measure. And of course, there's kind of some more backstory to why is Christine Pelosi supporting firefighters item, does she really love firefighters?
Yeah.
Who doesn't?
And of course, for those who don't know, there's rumors that she will take her mother's seat when Pelosi either retires or terms out or whatever it is. And there's a war. Yeah, we'll run for it against potentially Scott Wiener. And so maybe she's kind of vying for support from the firefighters. So this one's really, really kind of, it looks on paper like whatever, but there's a ton of interesting politics behind it. And basically Mayor Breed's argument in the end is you all who are running for mayor don't have to take on the consequence. You can just say this because you're not actually in office right now. For me, it's a real thing. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, if it does pass and she doesn't win, they will have to take that on. So it's a really interesting one. right now.
Yeah, and Supervisor Catherine Stephanie put this on the ballot. Am I remembering that right? Yeah, and she got some flack for this because it's not cheap, and once you lower the retirement age, I mean, it's hard to see how you could unwind that,
Well, it's not cheap, and she's usually a fiscal hawk.
Right.
So it's a little bit of a out of step move for her.
Yeah.
And she's also not going to be on the Board of Supervisors very soon.
So I think there were some who kind of perceived
yeah.
this as like a gift on her way out the door.
Amazing with the history of London Breed and the fire department, though, to see this be the break. To see this be the split point, because she was a fire commissioner.
Yeah.
For years, she enjoyed the support of the fire department and its union. Like, that was a major cornerstone of her backing. And to lose support from fire, amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, what happened there? Do we know?
There is that vying for all the candidates for like pitching themselves for the public safety kind of umbrella of support. And I mean, to break it this one, I think it really just was, like as Gabe was saying, in that room. Because every firefighter, firefighter / union person I've spoken to after that was just like, not just mad about that, but mad that she also supported the police measure at the same time. That's really what it is. Because there's a history of when police get a certain amount of money in the budget, that firefighters get parity. It's not a rule written down anywhere, but kind of like an unspoken political rule. And to buck that, oh man, that got their goat.
There's also been another kind of controversy when it comes to firefighters who didn't take the vaccine.
That's right.
And then I'm not sure their current status, but basically I think they're currently in limbo right now, whether they can return, and there's been some efforts to make them return. And at that firefighter debate that I was at, this was a question that came up, and Mark Farrell, when asked whether he would reinstate these people, he like 0 seconds later, he's like, absolutely. And then when asked, when Breed was asked about this, she sort of was like, yeah, I'm like gonna look into it, blah, blah, blah. Not necessarily not supporting it, but I think Farrell came just like, I'm totally, behind these people. I even think if she had ended up coming out and supporting this, I kind of feel like maybe they would have still endorsed Mark Farrell, potentially.
Totally possible.
If you're running for office, you can always promise everything, right? But when you're really in the office, probably, as you said, maybe say, I'm really making the tough decisions right now. And one more thing between, the conflicts between Mabry and firefighters is the chief that she newly appointed, who's not a firefighter. A lot of people are pretty upset about that, but that's after the fire union endorsing Farrell. So probably Breed is like, okay, well, I would just appoint whoever I like right now, right?
Yeah. So we know that the mayor is against this. Like, is there a major organized opposition to this measure?
As far as I know, not really. She's kind of been the only major figure to come out against this. The San Francisco, if you count them as any player in San Francisco politics, the Libertarian Party has also come out against this. But no, there really hasn't, as far as I know, been like a major kind of person to come out and say, no, it's really just the mayor.
Yeah, it's just an interesting thing. Something that conversation comes up with, like, people who don't follow politics all the time will always just tell me, like, I wish politicians would make whatever XYZ right decision, even though it's not what the political pressure is telling them to do. Well, these are the consequences of making the decision that you think you need to make for the budget. Politics will come for you.
All right. Well, that is just one of a few measures on the ballot that seem to be kind of designed to help the workforce, or for oriented towards recruitment. We talked about the police one last week that is intended to retain police officers. There's also Proposition I that has to do with nurses. What do we know about that one?
Yeah. So Proposition I is, I would say, like, generally similar to the firefighter one, though like the reason for it is different. So what it would do, it would loosen the eligibility for nurses and 911 dispatchers to receive pension benefits. And I believe I think the general situation was that when they, especially for nurses, go from part-time to full-time, there's like a delay in them getting some retirement benefits, and this would kind of speed things up for them. So there'd be more money going into nurse and 911 dispatcher pensions. And the reason for it isn't like the one for the firefighters. It's that the proponents say like our nurses and 911 dispatchers are really strained. I think Supervisor Asha Safai, who introduced this, has gone on the record saying, I've spoken to a lot of these people and like they're really at the kind of end of their rope. Like this is like a really serious situation. And I think there's been a lot of reporting out there about the conditions at San Francisco General and other places where like this is a really tough job, and especially with the pandemic as well. That caused a lot of strain on the city's healthcare system, and so definitely would be less of a fiscal impact than the firefighters. It would be about $3.8 to $6.7 million per year if passed, and then it would be slowly kind of increasing. So it could potentially kind of put a pretty big weight on the budget, but not as much as the firefighters. And in terms of opposition, actually, pretty much I think there's support across the board for this. No one has come out in opposition. Again, the San Francisco Libertarian Party has, but I think this is this has pretty large support across the board.
Yeah. So is the idea that you would get a retirement credit for the time you spend working part-time?
Exactly. So like during that transition time that you went from part-time to full-time, I believe there was some data showing like it weirdly could take like years for some of these people to do that. And so you would essentially get covered, your pension would get covered during that transition time. And right now it is not covered.
And I mean, what's kind of the bigger picture around nurses in this city? And are we having? I know that during the pandemic there was a huge amount of turnover, among nurses. Are we having a protracted shortage of these types of positions?
Yeah. So I was able. It's definitely not my like wheelhouse, the whole healthcare infrastructure of San Francisco, but I was able to attend a meeting, I think it was about 4 months ago, where the nursing union was talking to some of the health commissioners about the conditions at San Francisco General and some of the clinics around the city. And like hearing their stories was really, it was difficult. Like they've had, assaults happen to them all the time. Not enough people, to take care of patients. And so, yeah, I think there's like a general consensus, across the city, like, yeah, these people like went through a really hard time during the pandemic. And we should help them out, and similar to 911 dispatchers as well. And then just like a little kind of background on the politics too. So Asha Safai, traditionally kind of a labor candidate, was the one who introduced this. It's been supported by SEIU, and then I forget there's another union associated with the healthcare workers, but
National Union of Healthcare Workers.
Yeah.
UHW.
Yeah. I don't really know whether there was like necessarily a political calculus there. It might just be like him legitimately wanting to, help this, and or something to do with the mayor's race. Though, as we know right now, his chances look kind of low. So, yeah, I think it's like definitely one of the least controversial items on the ballot. I think the question will be for voters whether there's actual concern about the impact of the budget. I don't really know necessarily if a ton of voters are always thinking about that when they're filling out their ballot. So I wouldn't necessarily be hugely surprised if this passes.
Yeah, and we should also mention probably that Asha just had his second place mayoral endorsement yanked by the same national union, the health workers union that we just mentioned, and the reason being that he dual endorsed with did a ranked choice strategy with Mark Farrell, which he sat there in the living room of the former president or dining room and promised, apparently, allegedly, that he would back Aaron Peskin, and so yank.
Yeah, we covered that in our newsletter, Power Play, which you should sign up for at sfstandard.com/newsletters. Lots of good tidbits in there. So yeah, I mean, it's a great question that I think voters are aware that the city is facing a budget crisis, and we are suffering. Our revenue streams are suffering, and but it is a great question on how much that will impact the way people vote. Are they going to be looking at all of these things collectively and saying like, "Oh, gee, can we afford this?" Like, I don't know. Like I just don't know how much that factors into individual voters' decisions.
Well, and another thing that they may not take into account, but is a huge deal, is many of these propositions. Not all, because some of them have like a little addendum to say this can be modified by the board, but many of them are essentially enshrined in the budget once it's voted by voters. Once it's voted in, the board of supervisors can't muck with it, the mayor can't muck with it. The city is committed to spending that money, even in a bad budget season, and that essentially handcuffs folks who are trying to write the city's budget. They're trying to be like, well, we need to move money here to save this program. Well, sorry, you can't. The voters voted that in, and you're locked. So
right.
It's something that, yeah.
The only way to change it is through another ballot measure.
Exactly. Right? You have to go back to the voters and say, hey, we don't need this anymore. We need money for something else. And it's a whole difficult process.
I would argue that if I was trying to get one of these ballot measures passed, I would do it this year, because the cuts that we saw for the budget that the mayor and board of supervisors passed were not ones that necessarily like the residents are going to feel immediately. But from talking to a few people who know a thing or two about budgets, is that next year's budget may actually residents actually might feel something with that. And so I think like if I had to guess about it, like I think that people aren't like necessarily looking around today and saying, oh wow, there's fewer this, fewer that, and okay, maybe we need to like be on a little more kind of like a austerity mindset. Like I think that's not on people's minds right now.
Yeah. So we've got another city worker benefit related ballot measure, which is Prop N. And this has to do with a pain that many of us know well, student loans.
Oh, yeah.
What is Proposition N and how did it get there?
Yeah, Supervisor Asha Safai, again, put Proposition N on the ballot with a vote of the Board of Supervisors, and essentially would create a fund to help forgive the student loans of first responders. And it's not a fund that would be paid for by city coffers. It would be a fund where you could raise private dollars, essentially, donations. The aim being, let's raise $25 million, Asha said, and be able to forgive like $25,000 per a first responder. That's police, that's fire, that's some health workers. And the idea being that it's really hard to hire right now in those categories. There are some shortages happening, especially around police. So to add an incentive to bring people in. Like if you come and work for the cops for a while, after 3 years, you get your student loans forgiven. That's a pretty sweet deal.
And so this would set up a private fund. That, I mean, how would that work? Do we have to pass like a behested payments waiver or something?
I think the legislation itself is a behested payments waiver. Okay. But the crazy thing about this, and this was Peskin who was critiquing it, like it did pass with a 6-5 vote of the supervisors, but Peskin's argument against it was like, look, this is not something you need in the city charter. This is not something that, this is not a charter amendment. This is not, something that needs to go to voters. You have the support, Asha. You have 6-5 votes. You could pass this today. It could already be law. Voters don't need to vote on it. This could be law tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, why put it on the ballot then?
Yeah, and at that meeting, Safai had really no strong answer for that. He was simply like, I just think we need to call attention to it, essentially. And there is a critique, and we can never know people's true hearts, right? But there is a critique that some of these ballot propositions are vehicles for the mayoral candidates to really either get their name out there or be an ally to some group or another. I think embedded in Peskin's critiques, if I was reading between the lines, it sounded like he was implying that.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, so this would the fund size is $25 million. Is that what it is?
What they're hoping to raise, but that is
goal.
not anywhere
Okay.
in the ballot measure.
Is there anything in the fine print, like if we don't raise that money, then the city pays for it, or like? I mean,
No,
we're just
not
hoping
that I've seen, no.
a bunch of wealthy people, out of the goodness of their hearts, want to pay
Essentially.
some worker loans. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, let's raise some money. Yeah, that's the idea. Well, and you know what was interesting is that there was not necessarily like a lot of people like speaking for this at the meeting. It doesn't sound like there was like a huge clamoring for it. It does have the support of the Police Officers Association. That's the union of the San Francisco Police Department's officers. It has support from the Deputy Sheriff's Association. It does have some public safety support. They have said that it is hard to hire. Their ballot arguments do talk about how this would be helpful, but there's not necessarily a lot of strong support. There's about $200,000 in the bank to support it right now.
Has anyone committed to donating to this fund yet? Do you know? Or like, has there been anyone that's come out and said like, yeah, I would love to help these folks?
Not that I've seen, no.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a hope and a dream.
First, donate to the zoo. Then,
Yeah. 25 million sounds like the panda, the
yeah.
fund.
Yeah.
covers
Get
like a
those
third.
pandas in there, and then we can talk.
Pandas student loans. Pandas student loans.
Oh, yeah.
So who's against this? How does the Libertarian Party feel about this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure.
Gabe, new Libertarian Party.
That's my
reporter.
beat. That's my beat right now. I mean, yeah, I'm sure that like there's probably general fiscal concern about this. I haven't really
Republican
dived
Party.
in. Republican Party against it as well. Yeah.
What's the fellow's name from Riona Society? Jay.
Donde?
Yeah, exactly. Jay Donde. He's like wrote one of the few ballot arguments against this. And it really was just an idea of like fiscal responsibility and yada yada.
Yeah. So, but in theory, it's private money. So
Yeah, totally.
yeah. Okay.
Asha, he's the the union's friend.
Yeah. So any other politics behind this to talk about?
I would just point again to this being Asha Safai trying to differentiate himself as someone who is the union's pick, the union's candidate, and he at the platform at the dais when he was talking about this measure at the board really was hammering home unions, they need our help, unions, they need our support. So it does kind of show exactly how he was viewing this.
Yeah. All right. Well, we shall see if that passes. Okay. Let's talk about one that I really haven't heard all that much about or read all that much about, Prop J,
Yeah.
which has to do with youth and students at a time when the school district is in turmoil. What is this, and what is behind it?
Yeah, so it's a ballot measure introduced by Supervisor Myrna Melgar, and as you said, it's probably the least discussed, least talked about ballot measure. And I just called them and asked why there's no campaign for it, because it's not on the dashboard. And Myrna's office told me they have like $500 in the bank account for this campaign. It's not even qualified to be on the dashboard. So yes, it's like, I would say it's like a non-controversial, feel-good, that kind of a ballot measure. So basically, yes, the city has, all different kinds of funding for youth and SFUSD, or for children, for student, for everything, right? This big chunk of money, like 150 million to like 200 million. So this ballot measure is basically wants to create a accountability oversight, or we can say like auditing process of how we spend this money, given the big picture, like, the school chaos right now and their potential cut in the future. So they just want to figure out, okay, are we spending this money effectively? And who's going to do that? The controller's office. So they're just creating this process. So, sounds pretty good. No controversy, feel good. So there's no campaign. And yes, The only opposition is the Libertarian Party, and then there's no, massive campaign about this one or against it. I think on the voter guide there's no, official opposition, and it will probably just pass because people just feel good about it. Yeah.
That controller's office has got a lot of work cut out.
I know, they're really piling a lot on
Exactly.
the new controller.
Inspector General, the student fund oversight. Yeah, so the bigger picture is, yes, the city has a lot of money to spend on kids and youth, right? Parks, public library, all this money, but there's no like a coordination oversight. So Myrna wants, okay, we have to have this kind of an oversight on it right now.
Yeah. Next time we should just have a debate between, we should just invite the Libertarian Party and have the pro side. I think that would be a fun format next time.
Yeah. So one small thing about Prop J is I was told, and I did check on their website, yes, Bernie Kratz is against this because they think this is handing more power to the mayor to govern the school district or, to govern student issue. That's why they're against it. But there's no a big opposition.
It is interesting to me. The little nitty-gritty details of government often escape most folks because they're working their jobs, they're living their lives. I totally get it. But at different events that I've moderated or been on a panel about, very often I'll get questions about what's the mayor doing about the school district? What's the board of supervisors doing about the school district? And I have to tell them, not much because they don't have control over that. I mean, at this point they are. At this point they're intervening as best they can. But in a normal time, it is a state-controlled district. I mean, the state controls all the school districts and oversees all the school districts. So it's usually not the purview of the mayor and the board of supervisors, except when they lend extra help, which is what this is looking at, right?
Yeah.
Do you think this recent proposal for closures and mergers has any impact on this at all, or how does that kind of play into it all?
Yeah, I think that will probably add to the concerns of how the city or the school district spend money, right? So yes, this ballot measure will kind of look into how they spend money or create a better coordination between them, because as Joe said, the city has no control over the district, but they somehow would give money to the district, and also the mayor has some appointing power to the school board, right? So I think this big picture of the chaos in the school district will make a lot more people to think about, oh yes, we need this oversight right now. We need this more accountability. Accountability again. That's the key topic in this election cycle.
Yeah. We do have a question of why is Prop J on the ballot? How did this get on the ballot, and what was the driving impetus behind it?
Yeah, so Myrna's office told me it's actually a long time making. So they've been talking about this for years. She told me a couple of years ago there is a idea to creating a commission consolidating all the youth-related DCYF, all those oversight, and have a super commission to oversee this, but that idea fell apart. So this year they're doing this oversight on the ballot measure.
San Francisco loves a commission.
Yeah, again, yes, one more super commission. Yeah,
but it does remind me of the discussion we see about all the homeless spending that we do, and candidates for office have taken aim at this, that we spend a heck of a lot on homelessness and also all sorts of nonprofits, but do we track how well it's being spent? Do we track where it's all going? Do they all talk to each other? And once you start spending enough money, it's very easy for that to get messy. And that makes sense that it's the case with all this student spending, the children spending, that we started adding layer upon layer upon layer, and then eventually we realized, oh God, there's just so much of it now.
Yeah. And I would guess a lot of voters may not even realize that we have a Department of Children, Youth, and their families. There are more than one departments that spend, on that are intended to help kids, but how well are they all working together?
Yeah, and also Rec and Park Public Library, they all have all these different kinds of youth programs, right? So this ballot measure probably will look into it, have a very comprehensive oversight and coordination between them.
Yeah. And what's your feeling about how all the chaos at the school district could impact the chances of this ballot measure?
I think yes, people might feel more inclined to support this, more oversight. I think the question might be about the school bond, right? Do we want to give another 700 million to the school district while they couldn't even figure out what they're doing, right? That's Prop A, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've written about this, how there has been some concern that it could hurt that bond.
So historically, San Francisco voters has always been very generous to school bond. It's always passing for 70% or something. But this year, I mean, the internal polling showing, it's almost there. So it's a big drop from the generosity tradition of the voters, right? But we'll see, how this chaos in the school district might sabotage or not about that Prop A bond. Yeah.
Yeah. We have a comment from a listener. If J and N didn't need to be on the ballot and could have been done through the legislative process, it increases voter fatigue on these ridiculously long ballots. We do have ridiculously long ballots in San Francisco, which is why we've been doing these events. But it's a great point that, I think a lot of people are looking at their ballots and they're like, why do I have to weigh in on this?
Yeah, why do you ask me?
Yeah.
Why am I the expert on funds for retirees and what have you?
And that 300 pages voter guide, you have to read about it, right?
Right. I mean, does anybody care to provide a little analysis of why we have such large ballots in San Francisco?
I mean, on the one hand,
I know it's a loaded question.
well, I mean, there's so many reasons, but one of them, of course, in this mayoral race is, people wanting to get their name out there, people wanting to show allyship. But then there's also when the board of supervisors and the mayor clash. That's been a historic reason why we have a lot of ballot measures. Sometimes in some elections, they have put on competing measures against each other because they just simply couldn't agree. And they just decided to leave it to voters to settle the argument. It really can be a symptom of dysfunction in government.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think back in the March, there is a police technology ballot measure that's also maybe said, I could just do it through the police commission, but basically that's not going to happen. That's why it should go to the voters and has the voter to pass that. So probably that's, another example of how commissions, City Hall inside, bureaucracy basically fighting each other. So, okay, then let the voter to decide on this, which is, basically put the burden on the voter.
Yeah, and in some ways I wonder if it almost is like a crutch for our lawmakers, right? Because they know that if they can't come to a compromise, if they can't come to an agreement, they could just go to voters. They could circumvent each other. To what degree would it make them compromise more or figure out how to use soft political power if they didn't have this crutch, or at least so easily?
I'm also curious how many people are going to fill out their propositions, after going through the presidential race, state, local, and then you look at the propositions, and you're like, oh, okay, maybe I'm kind of tired by now. So I imagine there might also be a lot of those kind of folks as well.
Yeah, at least we don't have that kidney dialysis thing.
Well, Costa Hawkins is back, so
that's true.
All right, so let's talk about one last one, which is Proposition O, and this is not exactly in the realm of City Hall reform, but it's kind of an interesting one and one that the mayor has been very involved in. And Gabe, you've written a lot about Prop O. What is it?
Yeah, so Proposition O would basically firm up some of the protections around abortion rights in San Francisco. It was brought to the voters from Mayor London Breed. She has the power to place measures on the ballot. And it kind of comes during the backdrop of this presidential election that we're having, where you have a Republican candidate who was able to put 3 Supreme Court justices, in the Supreme Court and overturn Roe v. Wade. And there's a lot of fear among Democrats that their abortion rights could be rolled back if President Trump is reelected again. There's been talk about a national abortion ban, though I believe both Trump and Vance have kind of said, no, we're not really for that. But there's kind of questions about what that would actually look like. But anyway, this is, I would say, generally the things that are listed on this ballot measure are kind of mostly window dressing. There's not a bunch of substantive stuff. So a couple things that it would do is it would basically make it would firm up like data protections around healthcare data, so that another state couldn't say, "Hey, I want to, see all the women who've gotten abortions, last year." It would also create a fund. That I believe I'm not sure if it's either publicly or privately funded. I think that they're still trying to figure that out, where if for some reason some sort of funding at the state or federal level is cut off, there would be a local pool of money to help support reproductive rights. But the most kind of interesting part of this ballot, and this is which has really created the most tension, is that there, and this is an article that I wrote about, is a kind of fascinating dive into a world that most San Franciscans don't know exists here, is that there are 2 clinics here in the city, one in North Beach and then one down kind of near the southern border of San Francisco, I believe in the Excelsior neighborhood, that basically are clinics that, push for women to not have abortions. They're religiously affiliated. And this ballot measure would require that the city put signage outside of these 2 clinics saying, hey, this place does not give abortions. And there's been actually now a lot of pushback by the Archdiocese on this, saying, and there was a recent video that you sent me that Cordy Leon, am I saying it right?
The Archbishop, yeah.
Archbishop, basically said that, if you vote on this, you're putting these folks in danger by targeting them. And so it's I think kind of like, there's a lot of kind of interesting things going on here. I think, like, generally, there's a lot of people in San Francisco, kind of across the political spectrum, from progressive to moderate, that, would say San Francisco, we are a place that supports this. I don't know if there's a ton of disagreement in that realm. And I think for Breed, it was sort of an opportunity for her to show, like, I'm protecting, these kind of rights in San Francisco. But it definitely has created, again, some tension with the Archdiocese. So it's a really interesting one, and we'll see. I imagine it'll probably pass, but we'll see. It'd be interesting to see in which areas it doesn't pass, to sort of see where there's less support for this type of legislation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Archbishop asked Catholics to vote no on this.
Mm-hmm. So we'll see a direct measure of power of the Catholic vote in San Francisco.
Yes, and he's not particularly popular, so there's that.
He is not.
And he's also hasn't kind of given Nancy Pelosi flack in the past for supporting abortion rights? Is that right?
Yes, and denied her communion for her support for.
Wow. And she is particularly religious. She invokes St. Francis at nearly every speech not every speech, but pretty often.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned that a lot of this is window dressing. I mean, this also seems like partly an opportunity for the mayor to just kind of present herself as the guardian of
women's rights,
reproductive freedom.
Yeah, to be a cynic for a sec, it's amazing, and I don't know if you could speak to this with this measure, but how little of our lawmakers' jobs actually have to do with the things that are in the national attention. Right? Mm-hmm. Everyone's looking at abortion rights right now because Kamala Harris is talking about it, but our city lawmakers don't really have much to do with those rights very often.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Probably just being an advocate, and also maybe often touted herself as the only woman candidate in this race, right? So probably there's some issue that, of course, she wants to champion on, in this election season, because a women voter might carry her over the finish line.
Right. I mean, and that's a great point. It's a good vehicle for her to present herself in that way. She's also, increasingly invoked, some Kamala-isms, on the campaign trail. We're not going back, that sort of thing. So, I think it's partly a way for her to present herself as like, I'm sort of a national leader on this, and I'm going up against Trump.
Yeah, I was at an event that was hosted by Emily's List. It was like a pretty powerful Democratic group that really tries to advocate for women. And when Breed got up on stage, she specifically pointed this ballot measure out and actually had her finance manager for her campaign, Heidi Siek, who's like a well-known reproductive rights advocate, stand up with the sign and like go like this. And so, yeah, I think it's definitely kind of like her saying, you know, I'm like the protector of this. And yeah, I will like, if Trump gets elected, like be like a bulwark against, you know, whatever incursions his administration tries to make in this area.
Part of what you wrote about in your interesting piece a few weeks ago is that assuming this does pass, which it seems like it's a good chance of passing, it could trigger a lawsuit.
Yeah.
And there are conservatives who are looking at this as a violation of their First Amendment, basically, if we do have to post these signs that sort of single out these clinics.
Yeah, so there's actually been like kind of an interesting history with, I believe it's been local and state officials trying to kind of clamp down on these, what they call, I think, emergency crisis pregnancy centers. Yeah. And I believe it was in the last half decade or so, the city attorney, I believe it was the city attorney or the attorney general, essentially tried to pass some legislation that abortion, these crisis pregnancy centers would actually have to post these signs outside themselves. And then a court actually, I believe, struck that down by saying like you can't compel these people to do something. And so a legal expert that I spoke to said, I think this is basically them kind of like getting around that legal argument by saying like the city itself is going to be posting this signage. But yeah, people on both sides of this issue told me that like there's definitely going to be probably a lawsuit on this.
Republicans could not have handed Democrats a better gift than that. Because if this just passed and nothing really happened, then they could claim, oh, we're for abortion rights, what have you, in whatever election. But if they fight a lawsuit, oh my gosh, all of a sudden the Democrats can tout themselves as heroes of it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll leave it at that. But thank you all so much for lending your insights. And thank you all very much for tuning in. Please check out sfstandard.com. We have a ton of resources there for you all to learn more about the election, including a ballot bot that we published the other week that actually allows you to query the ballot measures and ask your own questions. So check that out, and we'll talk to you soon.